Hello parents, welcome back to our next section of the Tools for Parents seminar. Hopefully you had an opportunity to review the last videos, how we went into detail talking about craving and neurotransmitters. So earlier when we talked about the chocolate and chips and I made you drool, vividly describing the detail of the yummy sweet chocolate or the saltiness of the chips. So we talked about neurotransmitters or brain chemicals and how we specifically went into detail about one of those brain chemicals, endorphin. Yes, our bodies produce endorphins when eating certain foods and when exercising, but there is another time that endorphins are produced. In fact, there's a whole host of neurotransmitters that wash over our brains and our nervous systems during sex. So we're moving on now to page 10 of your packet. If I mention the term sex organs, then you automatically think of our reproductive systems. However, we need to help our kids understand that our brains are the largest sex organs in our bodies. This is why we started off explaining that our bodies are made to crave and that we're responsible for managing these choices with our cravings. So next we're going to talk about a few different areas. Puberty and how those chemical changes in our bodies lead us to crave in a healthy way to have sex. And last, we're going to go into strategies to help our kids avoid risky behavior. Our reproductive systems have either seed or egg with the purpose to reproduce and to fertilize and grow another human being. It's a pretty basic way to break it down, right? Think for a moment about all of our body systems. The complexity of how they function, we don't have to think about or instruct our hearts to pump blood, nor tell our lungs to inhale or exhale. We can sleep through the majority of our digestive system functions. The reproductive system is unique from all others in that it cannot function for its purpose to reproduce another human by itself. It takes our choice to partner with another to enable the seed or egg to grow into another human. Let's talk about puberty. Vagina, penis, penis, vagina. Okay, got that out of the way. For some, you grew up in an environment where those terms were never to be uttered. Some of you are shocked and uncomfortable even now watching this. Depending on the ages of your kids, I understand referring to reproductive organs as private parts or other descriptions. Honestly, once our kids are elementary age, we should use the scientific terms that are used by our doctors. And we need to tell our kids to expect more than just the physical changes of breast budding or hair showing up in new places. Aside from these changes that we can see with our eyes, there's a whole host of other changes that are taking place within our brains. Lots of chemicals are shifting towards processing at a high rate. We can explain it to our kids in this way. They can see a rapid increase in height and appetite. Maybe they're also noticing an increase in the oil and dead skin that contributed to the latest pimple on their face. What they cannot see is the hormones and neurotransmitters that have kicked into overdrive. As our bodies shift and adapt to these new chemical messengers, it can also be common to have a range of emotions: fear, excitement, sadness, joy, frustration. And that was just in 5 minutes during lunch break at school. Can we say exhausting? I've told my girls, I get it, you're feeling all the feelings. But having self-control during those feelings is something you have to learn to manage. This is where the conversations about evaluating their choices and coping skills comes in. If the conversations like those that we talked about in the first video are common language in your household, then once the hormones start raging, it will just be managing another level. Self-control is a fruit of the Spirit, and my Bible translation doesn't offer a caveat that this fruit is temporarily on hiatus during puberty. Remember how we talked about craving food and all the different brain chemicals that play a part in our digestion? This is a good way to help our kids understand that there is a draw towards or a craving for sex. It is not dirty, naughty, or wrong. However, just like the cravings for food, it is important to understand why we crave it and how to manage it. There are several neurotransmitters at play here. After all, our brain is our largest sex organ. Today, we are going to expand on just two: dopamine and oxytocin. Dopamine is often called the reward signal chemical. We do something fun, exciting, or rewarding, and then dopamine washes over our brains. This brings a feeling of exhilaration to associate with whatever activity we chose to release the dopamine. It makes sense that we would feel all this, whether from laughing with friends or riding on a roller coaster or engaging in sex, that our bodies would say, "More, please." The risk, just like dopamine being released with substance use, is that we can become addicted. We could automatically think that this is bad because addiction is such a negative term. However, our brains are hardwired to try and make us addicted to our sexual partner. The very definition of addiction is that we have a compulsive need to go back for more. This is why research is proving that pornography is so harmful. It constantly triggers dopamine, that reward signal. If your child has internet access, and most do on a variety of devices, then you have to be guarded. Know that if your child is taking health education at a public school, then they are provided with links. What do you think they will see if they decide to further research on Google about what oral sex means, because it's a brand new term to them? 90% of kids ages 8 to 16 have seen online porn, and 11 is the average first-time exposure. Tell your kids that they need to be guarded, and to tell someone, to tell you, hopefully, that if they see any inappropriate images or videos, then remind them that that draw is ingrained in us, because the point is to be addicted in a healthy way to our sex partner in order to reproduce. Without this innate craving, then the population would cease to exist. Okay, I know that that was a heavy topic. We're going to move on to the next chemical, oxytocin. For years, the scientific community recognized oxytocin as a brain chemical that was released in a mother and her newborn. As more research has been done, we understand that oxytocin is released during intimate touch, including sex. A unique thing happens when oxytocin is released. It builds a bond of trust. So yep, trust isn't just happening on an emotional level, it's physiological as well. Think about little kids and their peer or sibling interactions for just a moment so I can draw a parallel. The first time my oldest daughter came to me in tears because during a play date, her best friend told her that she didn't like her anymore. She didn't want to be friends. They were only 4 years old, but the look on my daughter's face was pure agony for me as a mom. Trust was broken. Thankfully, they found a way to come back from the life-altering squabble about who was deciding the game to play that day. Trust was restored. They could just move forward. Let's use that analogy to paint a picture. When a teenager engages in sex, oxytocin is released. That chemical just told their brain that it not only felt good, but to also build a bond of trust. The brain naturally causes them to crave that bonding again. What happens when the bond is broken? After all, what are the chances that these teens have the maturity to be in a committed relationship for the rest of their lives? Or maybe they are simply pressured by peers into the hookup culture that movies and media grossly glamorize, but that movie won't show the part where the brain will actually take steps of self-protection. The more often the pair bond is broken, after all, the neurotransmitters told the brain that they were connected and to crave one another, and then the brain will, after time, make some shifts. The way the synapses fire change to adjust the breaking bonds. A teen with an early sexual debut with several broken pair bonds will have a significant amount of effort to shift their brains in order to restore it to the originally intended state of releasing oxytocin during sex, then bonding and building trust. In the book Hooked, and that's a resource I've given you in your handout, they give this illustration as an example. The Chinese language does not have words with the sounds of R or L from the English language. Children who grow up in a culture who speak Chinese only do not have a need for these sounds, so the language center of their brains do not develop that nerve connection. Basically, their brains don't tell their mouths how to form the R or L sound. However, with effort, a conscious choice can over time make a shift to the brain. Let me repeat that. With effort, a conscious choice can over time make a shift to the brain. But who knows about this, especially when it comes to sex and broken pair bonds? I didn't have these facts available to me as a teen or even as a young adult, and I imagine for some of you watching, it sure could have spared some grief like it did for me. This will not be found in any of the recommended websites provided as resources for our kids that are in public school. They focus dominantly about avoiding pregnancy and STDs. Little, if anything, addresses their mental health. It is no wonder that the Ad Health study conducted with a group of about 20,000 7th through 12th graders showed that adolescent boys and girls who had an early sexual debut were 3 times more likely to be depressed. Girls 3 times more likely to commit suicide, and boys 7 times more likely to commit suicide as opposed to virgins. These statistics are a slap in the face to the educational community who says, well, they're going to have sex anyway. They just need to be protected from disease and pregnancy. What about protecting their lives? In the current culture that waves the banner for sexual choice, why is there tolerance for everything but abstinence? We can show our kids to not just tolerate it, but to see the health value in it. We can equip our kids with this knowledge and give them the tools to avoid risky behavior. What do these tools look like? We're going to go over some of those tools as you flip to page 11 on your handout. Number 1, talk about it. Remember how parents having an open communication about avoiding drugs shows a direct connection of avoidance? The same statistics are published proving that parents talking about sex risks with their kids is effective prevention. So if it makes you squeamish, I'm going to be blunt. You've got to get over it. We have laid out the serious risks to their health. So let those factors drive you to use different tools to get the conversations going. As the conversations happen more and more with your kids, and as they get older, then you'll need to go into more details about boundaries and the details of what sex is. In school, depending on the content a teacher uses from the adopted health course framework, your kids could actually learn that having oral or anal sex is an acceptable way to reduce the risk of pregnancy. With what we now know about pair bonding, doesn't it stand to reason that their brains will actually lead them to crave sex? How long until the sex act changes and they are at risk for an unwanted pregnancy, not to mention an STD? If we let cravings rule our choices with our diets and ate nothing but ice cream and chips, then what would the consequences be? We know for sure it's going to lead to health issues. At some point, you have to choose to regulate your food choices based on what you know is true. Constant junk food can give us a stomach ache. Therefore, we need to choose healthier food. We can expect the same if we choose a diet of junk sex. Casual hookups will have equivalent consequences like the diabetes, obesity, and depression that we would get from eating nothing but ice cream and chips. Warn them. At some point, you have to regulate your choices based on what you know is true. Our kids need to know the truth is the only way to avoid getting an STD is to never have sex with someone who has already been sexually active. The truth is, the only way to avoid the harm to our kids' largest sex organ, remember the brain, is to wait until they are in a mature and committed relationship where pair bonding and trust will not be able to be repeatedly broken. It's this fancy idea called mutual monogamy, in plain terms, husband and wife. Number 3 is making a plan. As your kids get older, ask them what guardrails they want to put in place to protect themselves before they are in the heat of the moment. Honestly, they might be oblivious, so you should come to the discussion with a suggestion or two. But let them come up with some of their own first. Encourage them to put this plan in writing and then revisit it as they get older. When they are younger, a deal breaker may be that when a friend of the opposite sex wants to be alone in a room, that they shouldn't be. Plan their excuse now so an exit strategy is already in place before they get there. As they get older, they might be in a dating relationship, then it's wise to not be alone together when the lights are off. Just set that boundary. Another one to create awareness of is keeping skin covered in certain situations. A teenage couple sitting side by side watching a movie and maybe even holding hands can be reasonable. But once summer arrives and they're sitting next to each other in shorts and tank tops, or maybe no tops and bathing suits, well, all of a sudden we have skin-to-skin contact. And we've opened a door for oxytocin to wash over the brain. What does this chemical do? Basically, the goal is to make a decision on deal breakers ahead of time. We know that in the moment, when attraction and desire can build, that the decision-making skills are seriously lacking. Popular culture and our schools are peddling junk sex to our kids. But our goal at Choose Health is to equip you to offer a different narrative in your home. Also, to give you the tools to build relationship so that your word carries more authority than TV, your kids' friends, or even their teachers.